Good evening, everyone. Welcome to Dreadtime Stories. I'm your host, Dr. Phobia. And tonight, dear patients, it's time for me to administer you another round of real horror stories. Tonight's tales all have a common theme: horrifying experiences while home alone. So sit back, relax, and enjoy tonight's tale, Truly Terrifying, Volume 15. So for context, this was not the first time my mother left me home alone at a very young age, but this is the time where it made the most impact. You see, my mom really liked the attention she got from me when I was a baby, so after I became more mature and set in my ways about age 12, it wasn't uncommon for me to be left home alone every single night. My mom had this bar she used to like to go to, and she'd have no problem just telling me to microwave something while she went out with her girlfriends and hooked up with God knows how many guys. Yeah, it's not exactly real fun to have a harlot for a mother, but I digress. Honestly, I'll remember this night for as long as I live, because even though it was literal hell on earth, it led to some of the greatest experiences in my life when my dad finally got full custody of me and I never had to see my mom or this particular individual ever again. It was a Wednesday night. My mom was busy getting ready, and as she flew out of the house, she told me the same thing she told me every single time. There's no reason for anybody to come to the door, so if anyone does, just ignore them. Enjoy the rest of your night, and have a great day at school tomorrow. And then off she went. About 20 minutes after she was gone, I was deciding exactly what to do. Go play some video games or watch some TV, as I really didn't have that much homework that night and knew I could finish it up in first period study hall. Though that is when a sound came from the front door. 3 sets of knocks. I did exactly what my mom instructed me to do. Just ignore it. So I trundled my way up the stairs to go sit in my room and play some video games. However, the knocking continued. It was that same knock, knock, knock pattern, but it kept happening about every 10 seconds. Whoever this person was, they really were trying to get my attention. So I crept quietly down the stairs and up to the peephole. I put my eye up to it and I saw a man standing there. He was just sort of shuffling back and forth and looking around. He was tall, skinny, and had curly brown, long hair. Think if Danny from the Game Grumps went through an extreme grunge phase, and that's exactly what this guy looked like. He just kept fidgeting back and forth and knocking on the door. Finally, after 5 minutes of this, he walked away down the front driveway and to the road. I saw him walk down towards the stop sign, where he stood there for a few minutes. So I made my way over to another window to get a better view. I could see him sitting there talking on a cell phone. And about 5 minutes later, a black pickup truck picked him up and drove him down to my house. They parked at the bottom of my driveway, blocking it completely. Then both doors opened, and another man who looked very similar to the first, except with a long, patchy beard to match, exited the pickup truck. They both got into the bed and grabbed items out. One of them was a crowbar, and the other was a ball bat with something sticking out of it. I backed up quickly from the door and ran up the stairs. I locked myself in my bedroom and called 911. That was when I heard it. The sound of breaking glass, and then voices from downstairs, followed by footsteps. I heard them go into our kitchen and start pulling stuff out of the cabinets. I could hear pans and pots being banged around everywhere. I heard one of them go into the dining room and start going through the large china cabinet that my mom had that was left to her by my grandma. As I stayed on the phone with the 911 operator, She told me to get myself as safe as I possibly could. So, I climbed into the closet, which had a little opening into the attic. I opened it as quietly as I could, shutting the closet door behind me, and crawled into this tiny little section of the attic. It was freezing cold, as it was November at the time, but I knew this was the safest place in the entire house. I heard them walking around upstairs in the hallway, and I heard my bedroom door actually be opened. They walked around for a few seconds, and then I heard the familiar squeak that my desk makes when it's moved. I knew they were unplugging the wires from my desktop. As much as I wanted to bust out of there and confront them, I knew, being a scrawny 12-year-old girl, there wasn't anything I could do. Just sit in that cubby hole in the closet and pray. My heart dropped into my stomach as the closet door opened, and I could hear one of the men shuffling my clothes around. And then he went quiet. The next thing I know, his hands were on the panel, and he was pulling it away from the wall. I was no more than 5 feet from this man. He then pulled the panel away from the wall and stuck his head inside. It was so dark in there that I doubt he could see me, but I was so afraid. I thought at any moment the operator would say something and this man would hear it, but thank God that never happened. The man then pulled his head back out, leaving the panel laying on the floor, and just walked out of my room. I actually heard them open and close the front door. Then I heard the rumble of a truck, and they drove off into the night. No joke, the police literally rolled up 30 seconds after they left. And it took 2 cops and the dispatcher to convince me to come out of the hole in the attic and talk with them. That's how petrified I was. The police tried to contact my mom, as she was my primary point of contact. Her choice, not mine. And were unable to get a hold of her. So they called my dad, who was literally a half an hour away. He got there in record time, and he would not let me go once he started hugging me. That's the most emotions I've ever seen my dad show. My mother didn't come home until almost 4 hours later, even though she had multiple missed calls from me, my father, and 2 of the police officers. My dad sent all of this information over to his lawyer, and a new case was opened up. He already had it pretty much in the bag to get sole custody of me at that point. But the real slam dunk victory in this whole thing is when my mother actually admitted she knew one of the guys. Apparently, it was a dude that not only she had hooked up with, but was also buying drugs from. She decided to stiff him. So, thinking no one was home, they broke in to steal back any kind of profits they could make. This was 13 years ago. I'm 25 now, married, and unfortunately my dad has passed away, who showed me what love really was and helped me build a life of my own. And as for my mother, don't know and don't care. But I will say this, you need to treat your kids right, because you never know when a situation like this could happen to them. I'm sure a lot of people can attest to the feeling you get the first night you stay home alone in a new place. And until you experience exactly what I mean, you might look at this and be a little confused, but I promise you, one day you will understand. However, I was never truly alone my first night in my new house. It was a fixer-upper at best, and I had bought it because it was the only thing I could afford. I decided I wanted my first house to be paid for in cash, so I saved up for 6 years, from the time I was 16 to the time I was 22, working all kinds of odd jobs and not having hardly any of a social life whatsoever. But this house was mine, and that's all that mattered. I could fix it up over time. After a long day of moving, I decided I was going to take a hot shower, relax with a Netflix movie, and then drift off for some much needed sleep, and wake up whenever I wanted to the next day, as it was my day off, and slowly but surely unpack. That was quickly interrupted. As I stripped down and got in the shower, I was enjoying letting the hot water run over myself, when I heard what sounded like pressure being put on some of the creaky boards outside the bathroom door. At first, I thought it was just the house settling. I was pretty jumpy when it came to all the new noises of the place, so I figured I just wasn't used to all the sounds that this house had to make. However, that little rationale quickly went up in flames as the bathroom doorknob began to turn. I thought there had to be some kind of rational explanation for this, but as I shut off the water, I soon realized that there was someone trying to put pressure on the bathroom door, and they were winning. Now, I'm not a small dude by any means necessary, but when you're naked and trapped in a room with literally only one way out being the door that's blocked, it sets up a whole new level of panic. I don't care who you are. I quickly stepped out of the shower and reached under the sink. I had remembered earlier in the day I had to adjust one of the pipes under the sink, and was praying to anyone that would listen that my pipe wrench was still underneath. As I opened the vanity, there it was, laying there in all of its metal glory, and I couldn't have been happier. As soon as I put my hand on it and pulled it out from under the sink, the bathroom door popped open with force, and there, standing in front of me, was a woman. She was wearing what looked like a thrift store dress, except it was completely filthy, and her hair was matted and coated in God knows what. She wasn't even wearing shoes. She was just standing there on the other side of the door just looking at me, but also not looking at me, more like through me, if that makes sense. She then let out this guttural cry and charged forward. In that moment, I did what I felt like I needed to do. So, hate me if you need to, but I swung that pipe wrench for the fences. It hit her right underneath her chin and sent her spiraling backwards into the wall. She laid there on the floor screaming like a wounded animal as I just stepped past her into the kitchen, grabbed my cell phone, and called 911. I relayed the entire situation, and even the 911 operator acted like she had never heard anything like that screaming in her entire life. The police arrived about 5 minutes later, and they had to end up tasing the woman. Even after I had hit her with the wrench, she still had the ferocity to try to attack two of the officers. They found that there was an opening in one of the closets that was actually covered up by debris that I hadn't cleaned up yet. It led into some kind of space that was in between the walls, and it was big enough for a person to actually lay down in. They couldn't determine exactly how long she had been there, but the property had been vacant for 2 years when I bought it. So your guess is as good as mine. Now here comes the part that you're probably all not going to believe. Even after that, I chose to live in that house for another 3 years. Don't get me wrong. I climbed through every hole, nook, and cranny in that place to make sure there wasn't another unwelcome guest. But that was my home, and I was determined to stay there. So you know that primal instinct we all have that tells you that you're being watched? Well, I used to think it was garbage. I always heard these stories of people, quote, trusting their gut, and I never really thought it was anything too crazy. However, when my parents went away on vacation once, I thought I got that feeling. I was laying in bed. My room was at the front of the house on the first floor. And even though the curtains were mostly shut, I felt like someone was just watching me. though every time I would roll over and look, there would be no one there. Throughout the night, though, I began to hear weird things. Just different taps and creaks that the house normally didn't make. I chalked it up to the wind outside and eventually was able to drift off to sleep. However, in the morning, I decided that I was going to prove my instinct, air quotes again, wrong, and that no one was actually watching me and I was just freaked out to be home alone. So, I went into my parents' room, sat down on my dad's computer, and checked all the camera systems that recorded everything the night before. As I watched the screen from the night before, around 2 in the morning is when everything started to happen. You couldn't have picked up my jaw off the floor with a forklift. It started at the front door. A man just materialized out of nowhere, is the way it looked, and he just stood out in front of the front door. Not knocking, not doing anything, just staring at the front door. Then he walked to the left, which had 2 windows that looked into our garage, and he stood there. And he stood there for another length of time, just staring. Then he made his way to the back of the house and just sat down in one of the Adirondack chairs on our deck, just staring into the abyss. Finally, he made his way around the corner, skipped my parents' bedroom window, and went straight for mine, and just stood there for 3 hours. He did nothing but just stare into my window. And finally, he just walked away. Didn't make any extra movements, just turned on his heels and walked away until the camera no longer picked him up. I knew my parents' vacation was much needed, so I decided not to call them. I called a buddy of mine and stayed the night at his house the next night, knowing my parents would come home the next day. When they did finally arrive home, I showed the footage to my dad, who was creeped out to say the least, and honestly a little upset that I didn't call him. That never did happen again. We never did see that guy. It was like he just blinked into our lives, tried to get a bird's eye view, and then disappeared back into whatever shadow realm he came from. Still creeps me out to this day, and for the life of me, I can't explain any of that. Well, there you have it, dear patients. 3 scary Home Alone stories. I hope you enjoyed them and thank you for listening. Like I always say in closing, check under your bed, look in your closet, and sleep with the light on. The life you save may very well be your own. Good night, everyone.